We are now in section 2, the value streams and processes perspective for this practice. Section 2 will have 5 questions in the exam, which will be a mix of Bloom's level 2 and Bloom's level 3. If you recollect, section 1 also had 5 questions in the exam, but all of them would be the Bloom's level 2 questions there. But here we have a mix of the Bloom's level 2 and 3. The process questions will be the Bloom's level 2, whereas the value stream questions will be Bloom's level 3. We do not know exactly how many questions will be at level 2 and how many at level 3. The exam syllabus is to understand the processes and the inputs, outputs, and activities of the 2 processes, and also understanding and applying the integration of the practice into the organization's value streams. Herein, we will take a look at the value stream analysis and also understand or acknowledge how the deployment management practice is involved in the value streams of an organization. There are 2 processes to be discussed in this practice. The first one will be the deployment model development and improvement. The second one is the deployment lifecycle management for individual deployments. We begin with the first one, the deployment model development and improvement. The focus of this process is on the continual improvement of the deployment management practice, particularly the deployment models and the procedures. So this can be performed regularly and also be triggered by deployment failures. So even though the name of the process includes development and improvement, the main purpose is for the improvement of the practice, because at the start, an organization might have some very basic procedures. Therefore, they may want to improve it. These regular reviews for improvement may take place every 3 months or even more frequently. It all depends on the effectiveness of the existing models and procedures and any other issues that might crop up all of a sudden. Here is the table of the inputs, activities, and outputs for this process of the model development and improvement. Now, in this section 2 or lesson 2, we have 2 tables. One is for this process, and we have a table for the second process. And we will also see there is a table for the deployment management involvement in the value streams. As you can see, there are a lot of inputs, activities, and outputs in this process. Many of them are actually intuitive or logical. Let's take a look at the outputs first of all. A key output here would be the updated or improved deployment models and procedures, and also the communication of those updates to those models and procedures to various stakeholders. There may be certain change requests raised for those improvements and the actual improvement initiatives through those change requests. Then there would be some periodic deployment review reports for the various deployments that are happening on a regular basis. And there also will be updated knowledge management articles. Usually these knowledge management articles would be helpful for implementing the case-to-case deployments afterwards, meaning the deployment personnel can refer to these knowledge articles during the deployments based on the improvements or based on certain procedures. Then the lessons would be learned based on periodic reviews of the deployments. The inputs are the current deployment approach, models, and procedures, the existing deployment records with information about the deployments that have occurred so far, the failure reports for specific deployments, and then the policies and regulatory requirements. And at the bottom, we have the continuity policy and plans, security policies and plans. And then there is a close connection with the release models as well. So that is also an input. And a lot of information is also needed, such as the service configuration information, the IT asset information, the SLAs with consumers and suppliers and partners, the capacity and performance plans and reports. Now, the activities themselves are the following. First begins with the deployment model planning, then implementation of the model, then testing of the model, then the periodic review and records analysis of the deployments, then the improvement initiation for the model, and eventually the model update and communication to the stakeholders. So this is a depiction of the workflow for this process. As we saw in the table, it's the same sequence. It begins with the deployment model planning. By the way, the picture is based on the business process management notations. We don't have to be concerned with that, with these symbols, etc. You won't have questions in the exam on this picture, but this picture, you should know this from the sequence perspective, and but do refer to the table that we saw earlier for the inputs and outputs. And then we're going to even go into the detail for each of these steps shortly. So deployment management, model planning, followed by the implementation of the model, then the testing of the model, then reviewing of the analysis of the deployment records, followed by the improvement initiation, and then the update and communications of the improvement to the various stakeholders. So let's go through these one by one, these steps. The first is the planning step. So this is done by the deployment manager in order to define a new model of deployment. And this can happen when a product follows a low risk, high success rate deployment pattern. And certain wasteful steps in that flow deployment process flow can be eliminated so that the deployment lead times can be improved. This is where a new model may be proposed by the deployment manager. And ideally, the deployment model should be automated as much as possible so that the human involvement and control of the deployment is minimized, so that there is less errors or almost zero errors during the deployments. Then the model implementation means the deployment manager arranges for the pipeline tools to be configured. So this is not the actual day-to-day deployments of components, but this is the pre-arrangement of necessary tools to support the deployments as per the new model or the improved model. So for example, enabling certain access settings, arranging the code support, for example, the infrastructure as a code kind of arrangements, branching procedures, etc., to be arranged in the tool so that those branching procedures work properly later on during the deployments. If there is no automated tools for deployment, then there should be guidelines created and communicated to the teams so that they can use them during the actual deployments afterwards. Then the testing of the deployment model. This is again done by the deployment manager. They can ensure proper edge case handling, meaning there may be certain situations like extreme situations which can fail the deployments afterwards. So they need to make sure that the testing is quite thorough for the entire deployment workflow, so that during the actual deployment life cycle on a case-to-case basis, the model works properly. If the testing is not possible for some reason due to lack of resources, infrastructure, whatever, a key point to note here is that the deployment manager need to oversee the first of the model's live run. So there could be a few initial live runs of the model where the deployment manager might make some observations and have some cautionary guidelines for the practitioners during the deployments when the testing is not possible. Then there is a deployment review and a deployment failure records analysis. So here the deployment manager works along with the service owners and others, performs a review of specific deployments. These could be based on certain selection of those deployments that have occurred, for example, failed ones or successful ones. And because there can be opportunities for improvement even in the successful ones. And of course, in the failures, there will definitely be improvement opportunities. So this analysis leads to identifying the opportunities for improvements. Then based on that, the deployment model improvement initiation occurs where the improvements are registered into probably a continual improvement register by the deployment manager. And then this is where the continual improvement practice will also be brought in